talk a little bit about understanding startups. I'm joined today by Dr. Jeff Standridge. Jeff, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hey, Jeff Standridge, and I am Managing Director of The Conductor and a General Partner of Cadron Capital Partners.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good to be here.
I want to start and talk a little bit about the different stages. So let's talk through the different stages of startups and startup funding rounds.
Yeah, so we generally think of a startup beginning in the ideation stage. So there's an early an idea that an entrepreneur or a group of entrepreneurs have, and they begin pursuing that idea, doing customer discovery, and it's probably even before the formation of a company. May not be, but many times it is. Mm-hmm. Then when they figure out that they've got something that is potentially viable, could be a minimally viable product, it could be they actually have some client traction, then they start looking at, okay, how do we scale this, or how do we take this to the next stage, maybe even before scaling it. And so that's generally when they're looking at starting to raise some funds. In the pre-seed stage, we have this moniker that we call the Friends, Family, and Fools round, or the Angel round, or the Series Seed. And that's just the very early stages of funding that is required to start getting some degree of traction with their business. From there, they usually move into a Series A. This is when they've got a minimum viable product. They're trying to optimize that product, maybe even optimize their customer acquisition processes. And then their Series B is they're trying to build it out beyond that minimum viable product. And then finally, Series C is where they've got a successful business model, they've got a successful product, they've got some repeatable processes in place. Now they're trying to scale either beyond geographies or client segments or what have you.
Absolutely. So I want to talk about each of those segments and how the funding needs for startups change as they go from maybe pre-seed to Series A and beyond.
So pre-seed funding is generally the initial funding, and what I expect as an investor is that initial funding comes from the entrepreneur to some degree, right? That they've got some skin in the game. Sometimes that skin in the game is that they are fully dedicated and fully devoted. They may not have the cash to put in, but they're foregoing a salary and focused on trying to get that business off the ground. So they're demonstrating some degree of skin in that game. They may then raise some funding from an angel or a handful of angels. They may even pitch to an angel association like the 412 Angels or the Archangel Alliance and get an investor or two there to continue developing out that minimum viable product. Maybe even in the seed stage, they actually get some funding from a small venture fund like Cadron Capital Partners or someone else. Generally then when they start to move to a Series A and beyond, then they're into more institutional types of venture capital for the most part.
And so similar question, how do the risk profiles for each of those stages change as you progress?
Clearly the highest risk profile is going to be during that family, friends, and fools round, right? Or that angel round, that Series Seed, so to speak. They've not tested the market, they've not tested the product or the solution. And so making sure that they have done the proper customer discovery, the proper fleshing out of a lean canvas, and they've really studied the market, their total addressable market, their serviceable addressable market, et cetera. And they know their numbers in that regard. That's going to reduce the risks, but the risks inherent at that stage are quite high regardless. As you move into Series A, still a pretty high risk type of venture. Even all the way up to Series C, the risks are higher than more traditional investments. But theoretically, as you progress through the different series funding, theoretically the risk is going to come down. In reality, that's not always the case, but certainly it's what is expected of investors.
Yeah, absolutely. So why do we see startups sometimes skipping funding rounds or not having a seed to Series A type model?
That can be for a variety of factors. Probably in most instances, it's either because they've gotten traction very, very quickly,
Okay.
perhaps. Maybe they stumbled onto a business model that kind of proliferated on itself more quickly than what they anticipated.
How important is it that a raise really be categorized appropriately?
I don't think that's as important as having a successful progression of valuation of your company. I don't get too hung up on whether it's a Series A or a Series B or a Series C necessarily, and that it's properly categorized. That's not something that I'm as hung up on. But I do want to know that with each round that they have raised, regardless of whether they skipped a round or not, or miscategorized it or not, what I do want to see is that there is a series of successful increases in valuation. What you don't want to have is what we would call a down round, where we raised at a $10 million valuation in this particular round, but the next round we're raising at a $7.5 or an $8 million. So something happened that would cause me as an investor to look at it and say, okay, what's going on here? Why are we having a down round?
Yeah, absolutely.
And many times it's because there was they reached a point of desperation. They were about to run out of money. They needed to keep the lights on and keep things moving forward, and so they took a lower valuation for the next round in order to continue kind of moving the business forward. It doesn't always mean certain death, but it certainly should raise some questions among the investors to look at that and really understand why.
So what other type of success metrics are you looking for as companies move from raise to raise? What are you looking for beyond just that, not a down round, slowly increasing their valuation?
Well, I like to, certainly early in an investment analysis, we're certainly looking at the business problem that they're trying to solve, the degree to which they have researched that business problem, that they understand the customer that they're going after, what we call customer discovery or customer development, and that they've done the work. They've done the work in that regard. Number two, look at the business model. How are they going to actually make money? Do they have a plan for making money? Does their plan for making money actually make sense? Number three, I know a lot of other investors place a huge amount of emphasis on the leadership team. Do they have startup experience? Do they have industry experience, or is it just broad experience? Not saying that the lack of industry experience is a showstopper necessarily, but it always helps when they do. Do they cover most of the functional areas, or do they have gaps in their expertise or experience? And then just the qualitative factors of, am I going to get along with this person, or are they going to get along with me? And is that someone I'd want to sit across the table and have dinner with? If I would not want to sit across the table and have dinner with them because of just something doesn't feel right, I'm probably not going to be making an investment in a company like that, because I want to feel that I can trust and that they can trust, that I can trust them, they can trust me, and we can have a positive relationship.
So I want to dig into both of those topics a little bit further, business models and startup teams and kind of how we evaluate them. So starting with business models, what are we looking for in successful business models?
Well, again, this whole concept of customer discovery, I simply cannot overemphasize the importance of that. So that, do they really understand the business problem that they're solving? Do they really understand the customer who experiences that business problem to the greatest degree? Have they concepted a product or a solution that really addresses the business the business problem that they're solving? And have they done the customer discovery, the next stage of customer discovery, to understand whether the customer would buy that particular product or solution? So those things are absolutely critical. Then having some degree of understanding of their unit economics, in whether that's profitability per transaction or what their customer acquisition costs are. A lot of these metrics that I'm talking about in the early stages are based upon a pro forma, so they may not be actual metrics at that time, but they've thought through we believe our customer acquisition cost is going to be this. We believe we need to sell our product for this. We believe our lifetime value should be this. And again, some of that comes qualitatively, a lot of that comes qualitatively through their customer discovery, but that they have rational assumptions underlying what they think their business model is. Mm-hmm. It may change, and the earlier you are in the trajectory of the company, the life cycle of the company, the more likely it is to change at some point. But to see that they have given specific thought and they've developed rational assumptions versus the prototypical Shark Tank pitcher who says, you know, we have a market that's this big, and if I could just get 1.5% of that, that's the lazy person's way to go about it. I just want to see that they've done the work.
So in looking at business models, where do you feel like the sweet spot really lies in scalability?
It really sits at the intersection of a Venn diagram of three basic circles. One would be the technical feasibility. So is it technically feasible to solve the problem that they're looking to solve? And in most instances, virtually everything today is technically feasible. So that's kind of a check in most instances. Number two, is the problem big enough, and is the urgency to solve the problem big enough that it would compel people to buy the technical solution, whatever that solution ends up being? And then finally, can they do it in a manner that makes business sense, or can they do it in a manner such that they can at some point get to a profitable transaction so that we've created a profitable ongoing concern? So technical feasibility, the size of the problem, and the desirability of the customer to pay to have that problem solved, and then the unit economics to make sure that ultimately we can get to a profitable transaction. If those three things don't exist, if all three of those things don't exist, you really don't have a scalable business model.
Yeah, no, that's really insightful. So there was something you mentioned earlier, customer acquisition cost, when we're talking about unit economics. Let's talk a little bit more about that. What is customer acquisition cost, and how does that play into to business models?
So obviously the cost to acquire a customer, so the marketing dollars that I have to spend, the number of reps I have to do in getting in front of a customer before they buy, the sales activity and the sales cost I have to expend in order to acquire one of those customers. So what is that customer acquisition cost? And what's the lifetime value of a customer? Because if I'm spending $3 to get a customer and the lifetime value is $2, then I'm going to always be upside down. But if I'm spending $3 to get a customer and my lifetime value is $10 or projected to be $10, then I know exactly how much money I can spend to get a customer and still stay profitable. And so there's this concept of understanding my acquisition cost and how long I can reasonably expect to retain a customer and how much they're going to spend per year in repeat transactions to help me understand the balance between those two.
Yeah, absolutely. So now I want to transition to talking about the founder's leadership team, the team that's actually making it happen. So a lot of times people will say that the team is even more important than the idea itself. Do you believe that?
Absolutely, I believe that. I run into a lot of people who want to talk about their idea, but they don't want to talk about their idea because they're afraid someone's going to steal it. And so they want me to sign an NDA before they even have a conversation. And, you know, I usually tell them that about 15% of the success of your product or solution is the idea itself. The other 85% is the execution of that idea, which involves the business plan, the business model, the team. I absolutely believe that the team is one of the most important aspects of success. In fact, sitting on a state board in the past where we actually incentivized certain startups, there were conversations that we had around the table that said, man, I really believe in this lady or this gentleman who has come to pitch. I'm not sure this is the right idea, but boy, I believe in them. We want to incentivize them to keep going.
Yeah.
Because they may not have, maybe this is the product or solution. We're not really sure, but we're pretty sure about them.
Or maybe the iteration just needs to happen.
Maybe the iteration just needs to happen. Exactly right. So absolutely believe that the founder the founders and or the teams that they've surrounded themselves with, probably the most important thing.
So what personality traits and skills are you specifically looking for when you're evaluating, okay, yes, they've got it, or no, they don't?
The big one is that they're willing to do the work. And you can get that very, very early on, whether they're not willing to do the work. You know, I've had founders who are working part-time in their venture because they're working full-time in their paying jobs. And their investment round, 80% of their investment round was to replace their full-time salary so they could work on their venture full-time. Well, that's asking me to take all those risks. Or just as I said a few moments ago, the prototypical Shark Tank appearance where, you know, they do the lazy person's approach to quantifying the market and the market potential. The market's $1 billion, and if I can get 1% of it, I can be this. So folks who will do the work, who will figure out and make some logical and rational assumptions and communicate those assumptions and build a plan based upon those assumptions to create a scalable product. That's probably first and foremost to me. I tell everyone that while cash is king, credibility is queen. And founders and entrepreneurs, every interaction they have with an investor or a funding source is the opportunity to either build their credibility or erode their credibility. So being credible is probably number one.
So on the flip side of that, what are the red flags you're looking for?
They don't do the work. They don't answer questions directly and forthrightly. You ask a direct question and they dance all the way around it and really still don't get an answer, and usually have to ask it 2 or 3 times to get a direct answer. And then, oh, by the way, when you do get the direct answer, many times you find out the reason it was danced around is because it wasn't a good answer. So just being honest and open. You know, failure to be honest and open is a big red flag for me. Failure to do the work, as I said, is a big red flag for me. So another red flag for me, and I've seen this happen in a number of instances, is if I'm the idea guy and I'm the visionary for my venture, and my venture is a complex technical solution, thinking that I can also be the chief technology officer and try to manage 4 offshore freelance developers from India or Pakistan, I've seen that result in disastrous outcomes multiple times where the CEO just was not willing to bring on a technical co-founder or someone with some technical expertise. They were afraid to give up equity. They were afraid to pay a salary, and as a result, they spent 4 times more than they should have spent building out a really lackluster solution. By the same token, having a chief technology officer founder or a technical founder who really comes up with the idea, but who really is not very skilled at pitching to customers or potential investors, and not being willing to bring in a CEO or someone who could actually present the solution or idea in a better manner. And so those are red flags for me as well.
How important is industry knowledge in the industry that they are disrupting or innovating? How important is that to you?
It's important, but the lack of industry knowledge is not necessarily a showstopper if they demonstrate they've done the research. So, I mean, there are a number of first-time founders who developed very successful companies in industries that they had no experience in. So it's a nice to have, but if all of the other factors align, then it's not a showstopper for me if they don't have it.
So you mentioned earlier, like going to dinner with a founder. You know, if it's not somebody you would go to dinner with, you know, maybe that's not the right investment for you. Should investors get to know founders in that way? Like how close should you be with someone you invest with before you get started? You
know, it's really, that really comes down to a practical issue. You know, with being the virtual world that we're in today, sometimes that's just not practical. The degree to which you can get to know the founder, and I would say the same thing for a founder, the degree to which you can get to know the investor. Because it is, in fact, a marriage of sorts. And you know, you want to be sure with whom you're actually creating that relationship. So to the degree that you can, yes, but sometimes it's not always practical.
So you've mentioned market potential kind of multiple times, and how founders can do that correctly, and how maybe they presented incorrectly. So I want to talk about, TAM, SAM, and SOM, starting with total addressable market.
Yep.
What is that, and how should investors interpret that?
So total addressable market is the entire market for a particular product or solution. If I were to secure every single potential buyer on the face of the earth. Not very likely, it's a very theoretical number. Then we look at the serviceable available market, and this is a more realistic subset that says, okay, based upon my geography, based upon my pricing and other limitations, this is a subset of that TAM that I could reasonably get in front of. And then the serviceable obtainable market is really a surrogate for market share, a much more realistic view of this is the number of clients or the size of the market that I could reasonably hope to acquire.
So how important is it in evaluating that the target market is accurate when it comes to market potential?
Yeah. Vitally important. If I don't have a good understanding of my target market, or even more specific than that, who my ideal client profile is, then I cannot create a repeatable marketing process, a set of repeatable marketing messages to actually compel that target market to take action. I have people who come in and I'm sitting down with them and I say, well, who's your ideal client or who's your target market? And their response is, well, virtually anyone could use it. Well, I understand that virtually anyone could use it, but if I'm going to try to market to virtually anyone, I'm not going to be able to create a compelling message that resonates with virtually anyone. So I'm going to go broke before I get enough customers to pay the bills. I've seen it happen over and over and over. So really having a very clear, compelling picture of who my ideal client is within my target market is it's a critical aspect. We even talk about early adopters, right? So using the early adopters, these are the ones who are sitting on ready to use my product or service. And if I can validate my assumptions that my early adopters are in fact my early adopters, then that might help me broaden my ideal clients to a broader version of my target market from there.
So where does the competitive analysis come into all of this as far as market potential?
What I don't want to do is build the same mousetrap that's been built and utilized for decades, and only realize it once I get out in the market and clients start telling me, no, I already own a solution to that problem and it's serving my purposes just fine.
Yeah.
So you have to understand, and even the Lean Canvas kind of gives us a prompt to do that, is what are the existing alternatives? What's out there today? How are people solving it today? And the obvious element of the competitive analysis is looking at people who are selling a solution into the market today. The more non-obvious element of the competitive analysis is understanding that the status quo is a greater competitor many times than another company. And what I mean by that is, how are people solving the problem today? Are they buying another solution, or have they created a workaround within their respective organizations? And many times people are happy with their workaround.
Yeah.
And you can't convince them to change behavior or to give up the status quo because it's hard. And so I like to suggest that entrepreneurs not only look at the outside competitors, but also to look at what's the status quo. When I was selling technology, data and analytics and technology, we used to say that our biggest competitor was not another company, it was an organization's internal IT department, because everyone thought that they could do it fine themselves. And so that's what we had that was the inertia or the status quo that we had to overcome.